This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. My friends and I were freshmen in high school. We frequently went out into the woods near our school that had some abandoned structures, and sometimes we went there to smoke or paint graffiti or just otherwise explore. It was always a pretty fun time. On a fall day after school, we decided to go exploring in the woods as we would usually do. For the first 10 or 15 minutes into our adventure, everything was normal. Then eventually we came across a tree that had a dagger sticking out of it. I immediately got a horrible feeling. One of my friends, Nathan, went over to the tree and took the dagger out, and sure enough, it was 100% real. I'm not exactly sure what I was thinking, but part of me was hoping it was some sort of gag toy. We all just kind of looked at each other, a little weirded out, but didn't think much of it. Nathan put the dagger in his backpack and off we went. It wasn't long after we came across that tree that things started to get weird. I was the first to notice it. There was a man dressed completely in black, following us, keeping a good distance away. He was always to the right of us, hiding behind some trees. From what I could see, he looked to be an average height man wearing a black hoodie, black jeans, and black boots. I wanted to leave the second I saw him, but when I told my friends what I'd seen, I don't think any of them believed me. They just kind of laughed it off. Either they thought I was seeing things, or they thought someone was just messing with us, and they didn't feel very threatened by it. By the time we were about 40 minutes into the woods, that was when they finally saw him. This time, he was a lot closer, about 30 feet away from us. I still couldn't make out much detail about his face because he had his hood on and his head down, although I could see he was wearing a white t-shirt underneath his hoodie. Everyone froze for a brief moment. There were 4 of us, and we just stared, not really sure what to do with the situation. Everyone stood in silence for about 3 very long, very scary seconds, until he ran farther back into the woods behind some trees until we couldn't see him. I grabbed onto Nathan's arm, who was the closest to me, and said, "We have to go, now." I had a horrible feeling in my stomach. At first, we made our way back to the entrance of the wood at a jogging pace. I think we're all trying to downplay the experience in our minds to not invoke pure fear and panic. We kept that pace for a minute or two until we heard leaves crunching and sticks breaking behind us. We turned around, and there he is, trailing us. We start running, and he starts chasing us. I was the one behind the group, so the man was closest to me, and I could hear his heavy breathing. That's how close he was to me, an arm's length away. We picked up our speed, and I thought for sure I was going to pass out because I was fairly out of shape, but luckily we made it out in about 25 minutes, stopping once or twice to catch our breath when the man wasn't in sight. Once we all got out, we just kind of looked at each other, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. We didn't talk about it much after that. I don't think any of us wanted to think about it for too long. Looking back on it now, we probably should have reported it to the police in case that man tried to hurt any other innocent kids going into those woods. But unfortunately, the thought never crossed our minds. I don't know if it was him who placed that dagger in the tree or why it was there, and honestly, I don't want to think about it. I don't know why he was there or what his intentions were. I'm just glad we got away, and I hope he hasn't hurt or tried to hurt anyone since. I just want to erase that incident from my mind, but the feeling of someone following me still gives me nightmares. This incident is of the time when I was in high school. My friend and I, James and Alfred, the names were changed, used to roam on the streets until 11 p.m. It was a schedule, a must-do for us to roam around the streets of our town multiple times. Those were the high school days. Near a railway crossing of our town, there was a flower shop. I used to stop there and talk to the owner lady whenever I had time. She was a really beautiful woman and was just divorced. One fine day, as I was returning back from school, I saw a large group of people gathered in front of her shop. Out of curiosity, I too went and found that the lady was murdered last night. I felt really bad for her as she was a nice lady. As I was about to turn back, I saw her dead body. Her face was turned pale white, surrounded by more than 20 cops. I saw that and was horrified, as I was just 17 then and I had never seen a murdered human till then. I bolted out of the place instantly. As days started to pass, people forgot the existence of that lady and her shop slowly turned into an abandoned garbage dump. I also forgot that incident, and years passed. We graduated from college and went on our paths. Now, it was 2018. More than 8 years had passed and I didn't remember much of that lady. I was home for Christmas. I called my friends and now 3 of us were roaming through a dense fog, literally shivering from those cold breezes, talking about life and meaningless stuff. We stopped near the railway crossing and watched a hearth with some fire left in it. We immediately sat over the bench around that and started talking about our important issues. The cold breeze was unbearable, but the conversation was too interesting. The fire started fading and we stood up to leave for our respective homes, as it was already about 12 a.m. in the middle of winter. Suddenly, we heard a sweet voice saying, "Stay here, buddies. I'll light it up again." All 3 of us heard the voice and suddenly I was shaking with fear. I asked my friends in a shaking voice, You heard that too?" As they said yes, I revealed the cause of my fear. "You remember when we were in high school, a lady owning a flower shop was murdered. It was her voice, and it came from her abandoned shop, and no one sits here, ever." All 3 of us stood up and ran like hell. We didn't stop till we reached my house and both of them spent the night at my place. The next day we saw the place in daylight. It was completely ramshackled with a dust-covered hearth in front of it and broken benches where we sat for nearly an hour. Her murder has still never been solved. What frightens me the most is that I heard the exact same voice whom I used to talk to for hours when I was a child. No one was drunk and all 3 of us could not have imagined the same voice and words at the same time. Now, I just try to avoid going to that part of our town and pray that her spirit rests in peace. My father loves me like no other father in this world. Of course, everyone considers their father the best, but my father was unique because, being the only child in my family, he never made me feel like I don't have a mum or a friend. My father is my mum, my best friend, my everything. But as I grew up, my logical ability developed and so did my power to understand things deeply. And one day, on my way back home from school, I somehow collected in my mind a screaming, strange noise of a woman when I was a child. My father thought that because I was an infant at the time, I wouldn't remember anything. But when something very important happens in your life, the subconscious mind saves it forever. On my last day at high school, I decided to share this with my father. I got home and he seemed excited to take me on a vacation, but seeing me in fear, he immediately made me sit on the couch and said, "What happened, son?" "Can I ask you one question?" I started shivering, hearing those voices again and again. "Did someone hit you? Tell me now," he says heavily. "What happened to Mum?" I said. He remained silent for about 10 minutes. I started crying, but I kept on asking him. Then he gave me the number and address of a retired LAPD officer. He told me this officer will tell me everything. My father said that he doesn't have the power to tell me the truth. I was shocked, but helpless. Without thinking, I quickly grabbed my bike to go and meet the officer. He was only 1 kilometer away from my house. When I arrived, I pressured him to tell me everything about my mum. After suspiciously looking around outside, he quickly took me in and said, "Your father and I have been friends for a very long time. when you were 2 years old, your mother was suffering from depression. She couldn't afford her medication for long. As her depression got worse, her psychological issues also increased, which resulted in a lot of fighting between your parents. In order to keep your family together, she decided to take all these different types of cheap medicine without consulting a doctor. This resulted in overdosing, because one day your parents were sleeping and your mother woke up in the middle of the night because of the psychological effects of the cheap medication, and she took some medicine which she thought was right for her. What happened next was her voice changed. Her face turned red and she started eating her hand and her own skin. It was like she was hungry for raw human flesh for a long time. She was screaming very weirdly, and your father immediately came to see what was happening. He was shocked to see his wife eating her own flesh. She was screaming, she was in pain, but she couldn't stop eating her own body parts. Your father, seeing your mother like this, felt shocked and confused. He immediately called the police. The moment he hung up the phone, your mother ran towards you. Your father was horrified to see your mother was only left with a few pieces of skin on her body, and her bones were completely visible. He realized she wanted to start eating your flesh. When he finds he is left with no other option, he shoots your mother in the head. Your father regretted this his entire life, but he did it to save you. He begged the police to find out what kind of medicine made her act like that, but they refused to tell him anything and created a case study on your mother, and it is kept in a highly confidential department of the LAPD. Even I don't have access to it. Sorry for what happened to your mother, son. I hope one day that you can find out